Before we get started on the job, I just want to mention, I'm going to be showing you how to do one side of the vehicle. The process will be the exact same thing for the other. Let's get started. One of the first things you want to do is safely raise and support the rear of the vehicle so the wheel's off the ground, and it's a good idea to have it hanging. The next thing we're going to do, if you have a hubcap, is go ahead and take that off now. Once you have that off of there, continue on to removing all 4 of your 21mm lug nuts and then the wheel. Now with the wheel off of there, let's continue on to our rear drum. It's common to have to give these a loving bonk to break them free from the area. Ours just comes right off. We'll have a look at that, set it aside. Now it's going to be time to get the shoes off of here. We're going to be replacing the hardware for this, meaning the springs and the pins and everything else. But if you're not, as you're removing it, make sure that you inspect it thoroughly and make sure that it's still in good working order. That spring goes from the rearward shoe all the way to the front. We have to take it off one side. To get it off of there, it's going to be fairly easy using some cutters. We don't necessarily want to cut the spring, but they do work well at gripping the spring. I'll grab onto that, and then I'm going to use my fingers up against the tool itself and against the shoe, gently try to pull the spring out of the shoe. There we are. That releases tension from that. Now I'll continue with some long nose pliers. The next spring that we're going to pay attention to is this spring right here. It comes down into the back of the shoe and comes out through the front. I'll just carefully grab onto that spring, pull it down, and remove it from the shoe. You can leave that dangling. Now that we've done that, let's continue with our long nose pliers and start removing our mounting pin here. Now the pin for this comes straight through the backing plate towards the front. You can see the end of it protruding out through this disc. What you need to do is carefully grab onto the disc here. We're going to press this in, and you're going to see the pin start protruding out a little bit. You need to turn it until the pin tabs line up with the slots on the disc here. When you do, the spring retention is going to be forcing it out, so be very careful. So there's that, and the spring that was behind it. Now let's reach in here. I'm going to push on the pin, grab it from the back side of the backing plate here, and set that aside. Now we can start grabbing onto this. I'm going to pull my spring out of the shoe back here. Once I have it out of there, I can grab onto the adjuster with the spring, and we can slide it out of its mounting position. Now let's look down along the bottom. You're going to find that you have a lower spring. Go ahead and pull the shoe off of there. Now let's turn this around. We're going to grab onto this actuator here and just carefully slide it out of the shoe. Set this aside. Remove that lower spring. Let's continue with our long nose pliers. We're going to remove this mounting pin as well. Now we can start separating the shoe from the e-brake actuator. If you were to look at the top of the shoe, you're going to find that you have a pin that comes through from the actuator through the shoe, and it's held in place by this U-clamp. For the clamp, essentially you just want to get in between the 2 ears and then gently start separating it. Once you have it stretched to the point you can slide it around this, just go ahead and slide it right out of there and then remove the actuator from the back side of the shoe. All right, at this point we have everything taken apart. It's going to be time for a thorough cleaning and inspection. The areas that you want to inspect, right here. This is your wheel cylinder. You want to make sure you don't see any fluid coming out of this area. If you see any fluid coming out of it, that's brake fluid, in which case you'd have to replace your wheel cylinder. I'm just going to go ahead and give these a little squeeze. I'll also try to push it back and forth a little bit. Assuming it functions properly, continue on with a nice wire brush. The areas that you're going to want to wire brush is pretty much the entire backing plate area. As I'm cleaning this down, I want to point out several areas. You're going to find that you have 6 raised areas going around the back side of the backing plate. Those are areas that you especially need to clean down and lubricate when you're done. That's where the shoes are going to hit up against. You want to make sure the shoes function properly. Now let's take the adjuster and the spring to the bench. We're going to have to start separating these. To do that, I'll take this end, slide it right off of there. Now we'll just take this and we'll start unscrewing it. Now we can slide this out of the spring. Set that spring aside. Now let's clean our adjuster. All right, so now that I have my adjuster fully cleaned, I made sure that I cleaned the threaded area inside here. I cleaned it as well as possible, and of course the area inside there. The next thing we're going to want to do is find the spring that matches up with this one. In your kit, you're going to find that you have 2 of these. They're each a little different from each other. I'll just go ahead and take these and put them right next to this. And what you want to pay attention to is the bends on each of the springs. As you can tell, this side right here on the original kind of comes out and protrudes like this. This one does do the same, or it looks about the same, but as I turn it and look at the other side, you can tell that this one comes around and bends in the opposite direction than this one right here. If I was to look at this orange one over here, hold them next to each other, you can tell they're an exact match. Once you find the one that goes on your particular side, assuming you're doing the driver's side, would be the orange. If you're doing the passenger side, it's going to be the green. Go ahead and set the others aside. Once you find the proper spring, let's get ready for our installation. We're going to take the long side of the adjuster and slide it right through this area of the spring. This is the short side. Now the next thing we're going to do is take the adjuster with the threaded area. We'll lubricate the threads. And now we can go ahead and turn this in here. I'll put it in so it's almost all the way bottomed out. Now we can lubricate the very tip of this here. Put on the other side. Work that around, make sure the grease is doing its job. Now we can go ahead and set this aside. Let's continue with some of that high temperature brake lubricant. I'm going to go inside the groove of the wheel cylinder where the shoe is going to sit. Once you have both sides of that done, continue on to each of the areas that protrude out on the backing plate. Essentially all the areas that the shoe touches against should be well lubricated. By lubricating these areas, it's going to help with vibration dampening and noise reduction. We'll get along the bottom area here as well. Now once you have that on there, continue on with the high temp grease, and we're going to come all along this area. This is going to go right up against the back side of that shoe, so you want to make sure it's lubricated so it functions properly. Now that we have all that cleaned, let's move back to the shoe that had the adjuster rod on it. We'll just carefully grab onto the entire rod and slide it off of the little stud here. Once you have it off of there, it's important to make sure you put this spring aside so you can match it up with your new spring. And you want to make sure that you fully clean this so it can function properly. Now the next thing we're going to want to do is take our adjustment rod here. You're going to notice you have the hook that protrudes out, and of course you have the hole. That's going to want to line up directly onto this area. It should slide right in. Before I put this on here, typically I like to add a little bit of lubricant under this area. Now rest this down into position, work it around a little bit. Let's take our spring here. For this, you want to come in through this area and hook it onto this. Now, you would just stretch this all the way down to the bottom of the shoe. There we are. That feels good. We're going to take the shoe that does not have the stud protruding from it. Slide the adjuster, slide the e-brake actuator stud through the hole in the shoe. Now let's take our clip. We'll slide it in position on the stud here. Make sure you press it in as far as you can. After that, pinch down those ears so there's no way this can come off on its own. That looks good. Now let's take one of our pins. We're going to put it through the hole in the backing plate. Once you have it through there, continue on by putting your shoe in the proper position. You want to make sure the bottom of the shoe is resting inside the groove down here. The top of the shoe is resting in the groove on the wheel cylinder. At that point, the pin should be protruding straight through. You want to make sure it's in the proper hole. Now the next thing I always like to do is turn the pin so it's facing straight up and down. After that, I can take my spring and I'll rest it on there. The whole time I'm doing this, I'm holding the pin from the back side. All right, so now it's going to be time to deal with this area here. To put this back on over the spring, you can try using some long nose pliers, but you're going to find compressing the spring to be difficult using these pliers. You could also use a specialty tool that looks like this. It's essentially just going to fit right over it. And now you can take this and press it over the spring. Now let's get ready to put our little cap on here. Whether you're using your specialty tool or even your pliers, be extremely careful. I'll continue holding the pin from the back side, line it up, press it in, twist it. Now the next thing you want to do is pay attention to it. You essentially want to make sure that the slot and the pin itself are forming an X, and they're not anywhere close to separating. This one in particular looks like I need to twist it a little bit. I'll grab that with my pliers so I can see it fairly easily, twist it a little bit, and make sure it's lined up. Now let's take our other shoe and our small red spring. We'll start the spring on this lower shoe, and then put it on the other shoe. Now we're just going to take the spring, put it behind this area, and then swing the shoe up into its proper position. Once you get it up this high, we're going to continue on with our adjuster. Now looking at the adjuster, you want to make sure that you have the adjusting cog facing towards the front of the vehicle. Also, you want to make sure that you have the cog lined up with the boot along the backside. Now as we put this in here, you want to pay attention to the very end. You can tell that it has 2 notches. If you were to look at the shoe, where it lines up with, you can tell that you have the e-brake actuator right on the back side of the shoe. It protrudes a little bit further than the shoe itself. So I'll make sure that I have the larger cutout facing towards the rear. Let's go ahead and take that and put it in place. Once I have it in the shoe, I'm going to continue on my spring. I'll start sliding it into place in the hole in the shoe. Now we'll continue on to the other side. Now this next part's going to get a little bit difficult because we're going to have to do several things at the same time. What we want to do is take the adjuster and put it up into the slot in the shoe. Once you have that done, you're going to have to grab onto the orange spring, assuming you're doing the driver's side first, the orange spring, and stretch it all the way over to this far hole. But as you start pulling on this to stretch it over, you're going to find that the entire shoe wants to push this way. You have to be extremely careful because if you were to push the wheel cylinder too far, it could potentially cause some serious damage and pop this side out. If that's the case, you're going to have to replace the wheel cylinder and you could potentially get brake fluid on your brand new shoes. Start sliding this in. Along the back side of the shoe area here, we have that little tab with the adjustment wheel. You want to make sure you press that away so you can squeeze the shoes in. There we go. Now while I'm pulling on the spring, I'm also going to be pushing on this shoe towards the rear. That's going to help ensure that nothing really pushes that wheel cylinder apart. If you don't feel like you can hold it by hand because it's under a lot of pressure, carefully use a screwdriver or some sort of prying device. The next things you want to do once you have that on there is just ensure that it is completely situated inside each of the holes. Now we can put in the anchor pin, spring, and locking cap on the other side. Before we go ahead and put the drum on here, I want to show you how the adjustment works. Look along the back side of the backing plate. We're going to find that rubber boot and carefully pop it out of place. Set that aside. Now the next thing you would want to do is carefully use a screwdriver or an adjustment tool and then come right in through the back side. Once you're inside there, you're going to start turning the cog as needed. What you're going to find is as you turn this one way, the shoes are going to start to expand. And while you turn it the other way, they'll contract. Turning this way is contracting them, and then spinning it the opposite way will expand them, or essentially adjust them out. Now with that said, I'll have these in the fully contracted position, and we'll continue. Now with all that said, before we continue on putting on our drum, there's a couple things we want to do. First, inspect your springs. Make sure they're sitting inside the grooves. Every one of them needs to be perfectly situated. Assuming that looks good, let's continue on to applying some copper never sees, clean our drum, and get ready for installation. It's important to make sure you clean down your entire braking surface inside of the brake drum. Once you've done that, why not clean down the rest? Let's get our drum on here. It's a good idea to take one of your lug nuts, start it on there. We're going to use this to bottom the drum out against the wheel bearing. Once we have it bottomed out, we'll continue with our adjustment. Once you have the drum on there securely, you're going to want to make your way into the passenger compartment. Pump up that brake pedal. Make sure it's nice and firm. That's going to essentially situate the shoes so they're sitting properly. After that, you can continue with your adjustment. To adjust your rear drum brakes, you want to make sure that you can spin them by hand. If you try to turn this and it feels like it's really hard to turn, they're over-adjusted. Over-adjusting your brakes can be very dangerous because friction creates heat and heat causes things to expand. When that happens, the brakes could seize up and send you off the road. It's better to be a little under-adjusted than over-adjusted. Now, assuming you have it to the point that you can hear a teeny bit of brake drag on it, but it's not actually holding up in any way, continue on by putting on your rubber boot. Now the next thing we'll do is go ahead and remove the lug nut here, and then we can get ready to install our wheel. Let's get the wheel up on here. Now we can go ahead and start on all four of our 21mm lug nuts. We'll bottom them out, get the wheel safely back on the ground, and then we'll torque each of them to 76 foot-pounds. With the wheel safely back on the ground, let's torque these to 76 in a crisscross manner. Torqued. If you have hubcap, go ahead and put that on now. There's one area on the hubcap that you want to pay special attention to. That's the area with the carve out that's supposed to be for the valve stem. Go ahead and line it up, knock it into place. Make sure it's completely secured all the way around so it doesn't fall off while you're driving down the road. All right, so we got the car back together. At this point, what you're gonna wanna do is make sure you step on that brake pedal, pump it up till it's nice and firm. After that, go ahead and hop under the hood and check that master cylinder. That's where your brake fluid is. Make sure it's topped off with .3 brake fluid. Go ahead and close the hood and take it for a road test. Make sure you don't hear any funny noises. Thanks for watching.